Greetings. The Adrian Dominican Sisters welcome you to a presentation of a sister story. I am Sister Peg O'Flynn, and today we're going to have a conversation with our Sister Anneliese Sinnott. Now, Anneliese lives in Detroit, so that's where we're recording from, is from Detroit. So welcome, Anneliese, and thank you for your willingness to share your life of many years in 30 minutes. So if you can do the highlights, and I know your whole life from reading your autobiography, you have many highlights, but if you'll just surprise us by the time, many ways that God has surprised you in your life, that's kind of the title of your story, then we'll just go on. So let's begin where you began your early life.
Well, I was born in Chicago in 1937. My parents had lost two babies about 10 years earlier. And so when I was born, my mother wasn't sure that I would stay alive, but I did. And in the meantime, though, they didn't think they could have any other children. And so they adopted a boy, my brother, who was 18 months older than I was. We lived in Chicago, across the street from Our Lady of Peace Parish, across the street from the convent. And my mother often would put my brother out on the sidewalk with a little strap around him. And one day she went out to get him and he was gone. And she couldn't figure out what happened. And finally, she found out that the sisters had taken him because they wanted to show him off to the others.
Oh, God.
When I was 5, my father died of heart. He had an enlarged heart. Yeah, that was in 1943. And
how old were you, did you say?
I was 5.
5, okay.
Yeah, my brother was 6. And in 1945 was just after the war, and the people that owned our apartment building wanted the apartment that we were in, and so we had to move. And so we left the place at Our Lady of Peace, and we moved over to a little apartment on Woodlawn. It was in an apartment building that was all by itself. You know, in Chicago we call lots prairies.
Right.
And it had a whole prairie in front, a whole prairie on the side of the building, a whole prairie in the back, and on the left-hand side were the railroad tracks. So this building, which had 45 apartments, was just all by itself in the middle of prairies. So we had a great playground. You know, we could play on the hill going up to the railroad, and we could play in the park and so on. So then my brother and I went to St. Francis de Paula Parish, which had Franciscans. Our Lady of Peace had Dominicans from Kentucky. And then when I graduated from 8th grade, for some reason, I decided to go to Aquinas. I don't know why I decided that, because I didn't know anything about the schools. Mercy was closer, but I think it was because my grandmother lived a block away from Aquinas, and I thought maybe I could see her. So I enrolled at Aquinas and was grateful that I had done that, because I had a wonderful 4 years at Aquinas.
Anneliese, you know, your mother had a great influence on your life, your early faith life, just your life. Could you just tell us or share again? Your mom was, very young with 2 little kids, and all of a sudden she was a widow and a single parent, et cetera, et cetera. Could you just elaborate a bit?
Sure. Well, my mother was born in San Antonio, Texas. Her parents had emigrated from, at that time, it was not Germany, but it was Germany later, because my grandfather did not want to be put into the Prussian army. So they emigrated, and it was before people could emigrate at different places, and they landed in Texas, and he got a job with the Pearl Brewery Company. And so my mother, and she had 11 siblings, and my grandparents lived in San Antonio. And my mother worked after she had 2 years, I think, of high school, and then she got a job with the telephone company. And her sister, my Aunt Frances, who was next to her in age, had gotten married and was living in Ohio. And my mother decided to go and visit her. And she had a friend who worked at the telephone company. And so she said, well, while you're in Chicago, call this woman, my cousin. Well, that cousin turned out to be my grandmother, because through that call, my mother met my father.
Okay.
Carried on their courtship by mail. My father was an artist as well as working at the U.S. Steel. And so he would write her letters and paint pictures and put them in the mail. And so then they were married, and my mother moved to Chicago, and that's how I got to Chicago. She had, after my father died in 1943, she had to get a job because we didn't have any money. And so her first job was baking. And there was a bakery down about 6 blocks from us. And every morning she would take the baby buggy, which we didn't use any longer, filled with what she had baked, take it to the bakery, pick up the flour and the butter and everything she needed, take it home, bake all day. And the next day she would do this. And she did this for 2 years. But after we moved, she couldn't do that because the bakery was too far. So she got a job at a drugstore, Crane Brothers drugstore, which was about 5 blocks from our old house. And she worked it out with them so she could work 9 to 3, so she could be home at 3 o'clock when we got home from school. And when we got into high school, then she worked from 9 to 5. Wow. But I was just thinking about this morning. She had so many tragedies. You know, her 2 babies died, her husband died, and yet she was never down, except at Mass. Every morning at Mass, she would cry. And I always wondered why she was crying, but I never asked her, I guess. And later on, of course, I realized it. And unfortunately, she died when I was only 32. So I never got a chance really to sit down with her and talk to her about her life and her feelings and her experiences. But she was a great lady.
And, you know, that's not uncommon for our generation, I think, not to go deeper with our parents.
Right.
And I just think that's the way it was. But you do sit back now. I sit back now and regret. So I can understand what you're saying. So, all right, back to high school.
Okay, so I went to Aquinas High School. And my freshman year, my homeroom teacher was Sister Ellen William. And I just loved her. She was so much fun and so energetic. She later left the congregation, but she was just great. And so I got very involved in Aquinas. I got into the sodality when I was a junior. And I just had a wonderful time. And in my junior year, I guess I started thinking about entering. Before that, I had always wanted to be either a nurse or I don't know what else, but I never wanted to be a teacher. Never, ever. But I guess I didn't think about that when I entered because everybody in Adrian was.
I wonder how many of us did. Yeah.
So I entered in 1955. I was one of 99 others. And, then my first mission, I stayed in after we made profession in 1956. In December, I stayed in. But then in February, I was sent out to Rockford, Illinois, because the only person that in Rockford that could play the organ had left the congregation, and they needed somebody who had graduated from high school who could play the organ, and I was the only one. So I got sent to Rockford, which was a wonderful gift to me because my mother could come and see me.
Oh, good.
She would take the bus to Rockford, and and the nuns loved her, and she loved the nuns. And I was there for 4 years, and then I was sent to St. Dennis's in Chicago, and I was there for 4 years. I taught sixth grade. No, first, I'm sorry, I was sent from St. Dennis's, from Rockford. I was sent to St. Kevin's, which was right across from the steel mills in Chicago. And it was a very small school. I think we had one grade of everything. I had 65 children. My classroom was behind the sanctuary. So every time we had a funeral, I had to give them seat work because we couldn't make any noise as of the funeral. But I was not only the first grade teacher, I was the dance teacher, I was music teacher, I was everything. And Sister Hilda Marie came for visitation like the last week of school. And we had this program that we had developed, and was for the parents, but she was there and she said, "Oh, you have to be in a bigger school." So that's when she sent me to St. Dennis's. But at St. Dennis's, all I did was teach sixth grade because it was so big. I didn't really do anything. But then I was transferred to St. Philip Neri with Georgina Lesnicki. And that was just a wonderful experience for me. I taught, in the beginning, I taught seventh and eighth grade. But then I went to Wisconsin for a 3-year summer program in Orff. Now, you probably don't know what Orff is. Orff is it was a music technique developed by Karl Orff, who was a German composer. And you taught everything by rote first. And after the children could sing and count and do everything by rote, then you taught them the written language, the music. And we had some wonderful instruments. We had a great, great time. And so I ended up teaching all music at Phillips. And in 1971, my mother died suddenly. And that really was a devastating thing for me. But in 1974, I got this letter or call, I can't remember which, from somebody, I think it was from somebody on the council, asking me if I would be willing to participate in this ordination project. I had never, ever thought of women's ordination. And if I thought of it, I thought it was wrong. I mean, I was very, and I couldn't figure out why they were asking me. But then Georgina called me, and so did a couple other people who had been part of that conference called me, and they said, "We think you should do this." So I said, "Well, I don't know what else I can do besides teach Orff, and I've been doing that successfully for many years." So I thought, well, okay, I'll try it. So I went to Orchard Lake. Had no idea what it was or where it was. Got out there and found out it was a Polish seminary in the middle of nowhere, all male.
But in Michigan, yeah.
In Michigan, yeah. So, Joan Delaplane and Mary Tardif had been there already 1 year, and they had lived in Walled Lake, at the convent in Walled Lake. But Tony Kosnick, who was the dean at that time, thought it would be much better if we could move on campus, because until we moved on campus, we wouldn't break through this all male kind of, picture. So we moved into the barracks, which was a building that was built in 1850 for a group of young men who were military. And so our quarters were quite interesting. We had one bathroom across the way that was built for males, a big bathroom. And then we had one little bathroom. We had a little kind of, it wasn't even a kitchen, it was a sink. And then we had something we could plug in to make coffee and stuff. Anyway, I was there for 4 years as a student. And at the end of the 4 years, I didn't know quite what I was going to do. I thought, well, maybe I could get a job teaching or something. And then Frank Hoper, who was the dean at the time, asked me to come in for a talk. And he said, I'd like you to teach theology at the college. And I was flabbergasted because theology was absolutely the worst classes I had had at Orchard Lake. We had one professor who was from Poland, and we used to say that he had one set of notes, and every class he taught, he threw them up in the air in whatever order they came down. That's how the order he taught. So my theology was zip zero. And but when I talked to both Frank and Tony, they said, well, you can learn as you go. So that's what I did. I started teaching theology to the college at the college level. And I think I eventually taught also the seminarians. But then during that time was the time that Archbishop Shucka really got on Tony for he had edited a book on human sexuality, and there were some things in it that officially the Catholic Church didn't eschew. And so Shucka told him that, he was got to go. And so at that time, I had just gotten on the the committee that
the Constitution.
Thank you.
Constitution.
Yeah, and
that's the Congregation Committee.
That was the Congregation Committee, and Nadine, Mary Tardif, myself, I can't think of their name. My name thing is gone. Anyway, we had just started work on that, and we did that in Ogdensburg, New York, which was where Mary Tardif was, because we didn't want to do it in Adrian because it was too distracting for the people on the council. Miriam Mullins was the head of it, and she was on the council, and we didn't want to do it there. And nobody else, we couldn't do it at Orchard Lake because they wouldn't be able to eat. So we decided we would go. Mary had just taken a job at the seminary there in Ogdensburg. So we went up to Ogdensburg, which had nothing else. So we had no distractions. And it was one day we decided to take a day off and go to Ottawa. And while we were in Ottawa, Nadine and I were on a little boat someplace. And she said, well, when are you going to get your doctorate? And I said, oh, don't you think I'm too old? And she said, no. So when I went back, because of the thing at Orchard Lake was falling apart anyway, I did some work, and I finally decided I would apply to Leuven. Mary Beth Howell was already there. So I went to Leuven and spent 2 years at Leuven and finally got my doctorate. And when I came back, I didn't know what I was going to do. And by that time, Tony had been invited to Marygrove College to work in the pastoral ministry department. And he called me and asked me if I would be willing to come and work with him. So when I came back to Detroit, I went to Marygrove. And then when he retired, I became the head of the department. But while I was at Marygrove, there was this group down the hall who were called the Ecumenical Theological Center. And they were, it was headed by Jack Beersdorf. And it was an organization that was trying to bring together the different people, different faith traditions that were in Detroit. And at that time, Cardinal Shucka closed St. John's Seminary and moved everything to Sacred Heart in the city, but closed off the MDiv program so that only Roman Catholic male priesthood candidates could do the MDiv. And before, when it was St. John's, they had women, they had Protestants, they had everybody in the area who wanted to get a degree in theology. And so Jack felt that there was a need in Detroit have some place where people could get a theological degree. And so he invited me, because Tony was already working in the doctoral program at ETS. He invited me to come and talk to him about this possibility. So we talked, and eventually we went to Chicago and talked to some folks at Garrett Evangelical, which was a Methodist seminary, and asked if they would like sponsor us as a satellite of their program. And so that's what happened the first couple years. So I was working part-time, 3/4 at Marygrove and half-time at ETC.
Can you tell us what ETS is, the initials?
Well, it originally was Ecumenical Theological Center,
Okay.
but after we moved downtown and had our full program, it became Ecumenical Theological Seminary, and that's what it is today.
Yeah.
So that's how I ended up at ETS. And then the president at Marygrove decided to get rid of the master's program because it wasn't attracting enough students. And so I moved it down to ETS and then left Marygrove and eventually ended up in ETS and retired 2 years ago. So that's kind of been my life.
And so what is your life at present?
Well, my life at present is cooking. I do all the cooking. I'm tutoring. We have a new center, All Saints, which Mary
Hammond.
Thank you. Mary Hammond started, and she had come and asked me if I would be on the board.
Okay.
That's how I got attached there. And then I decided since I had free time, I would tutor. So right now I'm tutoring 2 people. One is a woman from Mexico whom I tutored 3 years ago. I tutored her for almost 3 years, and her husband was arrested because he's illegal. He was put in jail, and so he finally decided to go back to Mexico because there was no point sitting in Monroe in a jail. So then she took her 2 kids and went back to Mexico. But all of a sudden she showed up again. She has a new passport, and her kids are American citizens because they were born here. So she's back. So I'm tutoring her, and then her name is Anneliese, and then I'm tutoring a young woman from from Puerto Rico, who doesn't have those problems because she's Puerto Rican, and she just got married, and her husband's ex owned the house, so they had to get out of the house, so they had to move. So, but now I'm back tutoring both of them. So, so I do that. I tutor. I do most of the grocery shopping. We're pretty active at our parish.
Yes, very.
Lady Gate of Heaven. I'm on the racism committee here. I mean, in the congregation. We have a group that's comes out of St. Suzanne's, and they're a group of lay Franciscans. One of them is a member of our parish at St. Suzanne. And we have a racism committee that we're working with the Archdiocese, hopefully the Archdiocese of Detroit, in trying to bring some kind of recognition regarding racism. Last year, they had a meeting with a young man who works for the Center for Creative Studies, and they were talking about, the need to get something going. And he suggested that he take a group of youngsters that he teaches at the center, grade school and high school, and they spend a year doing research and painting Black Catholics.
Okay, yes.
And so they did that, and now those portraits are in our church, but they're going to hopefully go on a kind of a pilgrimage. They're going to be in Adrian next summer.
Wow. Sounds familiar, you and your pilgrimages. How well you did, you and Cheryl, with the Holy Land pilgrimage, which for years benefited so many people. We're going to have to draw this to a close, but I usually ask a question, where do you think the Spirit is leading you at this time? However, I think I'm going to say, since you use the God of surprises so much, where do you think God's next surprise for you might be?
I have no idea. I don't know. I don't
Yeah,
know. I'm just plugging along.
that's right. What do you do for fun?
Oh, for fun. I read. I read a lot.
I know you do. Uh-huh.
I walk around the park. We live right across the street from a park, and I walk around the park.
Good.
And not too much during lockup, but I like to I like to go places, but we haven't been able to do that. So, um, but I just enjoy my life, I guess.
Hmm. Do you have, besides the many things you shared with us already, do you have any specific words of wisdom for those of us that are listening to you?
Oh dear, words of
Just,
wisdom.
just a line, a scripture saying, or some famous person saying that has helped you be the person you continue to be.
I would say just be open to the God of surprises.
Yeah, I like that. Uh-huh. Very much. And you have certainly given above and beyond to so many people. Talk about ecumenism, which is a very special thing for you, and feminism, a
Yeah,
God that welcomes all people, male, female. Yes,
right. And
yes,
I think that the ecumenical part of my life has been the richest because
yes.
I've gotten to know all kinds of people from all different traditions and come to recognize them and value them.
Hmm. And the richness of diversity. So
Right.
let me just say thank you, Sister Anneliese, for your sharing, and your story certainly is very rich. And you've not kept it for yourself. You continually share who you are and your gracious hospitality and your, I don't want to say simplistic, but there's not airs about you. You are Anneliese Sinnott, and that's who we love. That is who we love. So thank you so much for your many gifts that you continue to give us as members of the congregation and all of God's creation. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well,
You
thank
are
you.
you are very special. And Tony Kosnick was very special too, and I know what a loss that was for you.
Right.
So blessings be on your way, and go get the cooking done for tonight or the grocery shopping.
Okay.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.